Hello fellow knitters! So, the other day somebody asked me a question about how to get into knitting, something that I'll respond to in another video or post. They made the comment about knitting being a craft mostly done by women, and this anon suggested that at a time knitting was predominantly done by sailors. So, it got my brain thinking, and now, here's a history lesson. Knitting 101. As far as we know, knitting is a relatively new craft. The oldest form of knitting is actually found in the 11th century Egypt, where they used a single needle and multiple threads to make socks. Sometime in the 1970s, the Danish named this nalbinding. I'm probably going to get flack from my Danish followers. The technique is basically pulling loops through loops, so it's not exactly like the knitting we do today, more closely like crochet. From Egypt, this form of knitting made its way into Europe. In the 13th century, Spanish royalty would request stockings and throw pillows from Muslim knitters. They said the gauges were somewhere around 25 stitches and 32 rows per inch. Not 4 inches, per inch. Also during this time, the only stitch used then was the stockinette stitch, and always in the round using double-pointed needles. Even if they wanted something knit flat, they'd knit it in the round and then cut it in half. Sometime in the mid-16th century, we saw the invention of the purl stitch in a pair of stockings. These stockings belonged to a Spanish noblewoman, and they even had hints of lacework like yarn overs. Just think about all the socks and caps that were made up to this point only in stockinette. So they probably all had that curled brim in the socks too. Soon knitting was catching on, and sometime in the 1400s, many people knew how to knit, mostly made garments for themselves. Since we're now into Europe, the use of wool was becoming more prominent than silk or cotton. Silk was still a high-ticket item, but cotton farms started growing because of demand. Here's where we finally see what the anon was talking about. Sailors loved knitting because it was something they could easily do while on their trips. Needles were small and portable, and as we all know, knitting can kill a few hours. On and on through the years, though, knitting and knitted garments became more and more popular, and would go back and forth between eras of complex knitting for the rich and everyday knitting for those who knew how to. In the 1900s, knitting really boomed because of the Depression and World War I and II. Just my opinion, but I'd speculate that this is where knitting became something that only women did. While the men were out fighting a war, women would be knitting them socks to keep them warm. So when they came back, those same women would be making socks and sweaters for their family now, but men wouldn't be picking up needles anytime soon. After the war, we can see new techniques begin to arise, like cabling in Ireland, and even the metric system we use for needles today wasn't invented until the 1970s. So, here we are, year 2013. We now use different gauge yarns made of alpaca, bamboo, mohair, dog, you name it, and someone's knitted with it. Also, there's been a little bit of an increase in the number of men knitting, which is great. So, now with the history lesson out of the way, it's contest time. All the information will be down below in the info bar, but it'll also be on Tumblr. So, if you want to be a part of the contest, make sure you follow me on YouTube. Make sure you follow me on Tumblr most of all, at The Prince and the Pearl. I really hope to get a great response, and thank you so much to all my followers. I really, really do appreciate all of you so much. Bye. There's a cat in there. Say hello. 2 cats.